I think it's interesting that one of the stories that we have not talked about in our Bible lesson yet is about the King Solomon. And we started our kindergarten year looking at Proverbs, and we memorized Proverbs chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Do you remember those verses? Can you say them with me? Proverbs 3, 1 through 6. My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace, shall they add to thee. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck, write them upon the table of thine heart. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. And then we sang the last one verses. Do you remember? Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Trust in the Lord, trust in the Lord, trust in the Lord, and he shall direct thy paths. Proverbs 3, 1 through 6. Do you remember way back to the beginning of the year? And I saved our last lessons in our Bible's curriculum to talk about King Solomon, and then there's another man that we want to look at as we finish out our kindergarten year. But King Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived, and God used him to write down for us the Proverbs, the book of wisdom. And Mrs. Stackerberry goes through Proverbs every month, and I read a proverb a day. And in May, there are 31 days. Guess how many Proverbs there are? 31. So every day gets a chapter. Now, that doesn't mean I read all the verses every time, but I read, and when God points out something to me to think about all day long, I do that. And then I study and read other things that will help me make good decisions in life. And every time we go to the Bible, we find something not new, because remember, God's word has been passed down, and we're not adding to it. It's just I see something new that maybe I hadn't seen before, and that's what God does for us. The Bible's like a treasure, and every time we go to it, we find something beautiful and something rare and precious that we can use to make our life beautiful. Well, God had several men who wrote his words down for us to remember. And through our Bible lessons this year, we have learned about the people who lived in real places, who had real problems in life, and God recorded those so we could learn from their lives. One of the men he used to write these wonderful things down for us was Solomon, and he was very wise. And do you know what it means to be wise? It means that God will help you to know the difference between right and wrong, good and bad. It helps you understand how to treat other people, because sometimes we don't do so good with that, do we? Being wise, it helps us know when to obey and how important it is. And once there was the King Solomon, who was very wise. And in our Bible story today, we'll look at what made the king wise. Well, many times people would come to King Solomon to find out how to settle a problem. And King Solomon would always ask God. He would pray and ask God for wisdom. You know what? There's a verse in the Bible that reminds us that if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God. That's found in the book of James in the New Testament. You see, there were other people that God used to write those words who knew where they needed to get wisdom. Boys and girls, we don't always know what to do, when to do it. We don't always know the right way. We need somebody's help. And God is always there to help us. Well, God would give King Solomon the best advice he could, and then King Solomon would share that advice with the people. And the people knew that King Solomon's wisdom came from God. How do you think they knew that? He told them. Well, King Solomon wanted to build a great temple to the Lord. And that temple was a building where God's people would come and worship him. We would call it a church building. But in the Bible times, they called it a temple. And King Solomon had many, 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 many men to help him. And he wasn't like King Pharaoh, who made the slaves work really hard. No, no, no. King Solomon had men who he used to work, and he treated them kindly. Well, they got together and they built this beautiful temple. It was the most beautiful in the whole area, made of stone. And then King Solomon told the men to make pictures of flowers and trees out of gold. Ooh. And put them on the doors of the temple. And so these people, they had to be creative. They were artsy, craftsy. Some of you girls would like that, wouldn't you? But have you ever painted with gold? I haven't. So these people got together and they helped King Solomon, and they built this beautiful temple. They built lovely porches on the side of the temple. And King Solomon put 2 stones that had God's commandments written on them. And he put them in a beautiful box called the Ark of the Covenant. And King Solomon put that ark in a special place in the temple so they could all see it. And God filled the temple with his presence. And people loved to go to the temple to worship the one true God. They would sing, and they would offer sacrifices to the Lord, and they would pray, and they would listen to lessons from God's word. Do you think the people were thankful for that beautiful place to gather together? They were. What made Solomon such a wise man to do all that? God gave him the wisdom. How do we know that he loved and served the one true God? Well, he spent time talking to God and then sharing what God had talked to him about. And then he gathered people together and shared that wisdom, just like we do with our churches. Now, right now, we couldn't do that. We have to do it at home. But what a wonderful plan that God had for King Solomon. And Solomon shared his wisdom, and you know what? We can still read his wisdom today, and it can help us make good decisions even now.